the Arab conquest, but a number of churches, we have seen in the first lecture, with dated inscriptions prove a continuing building activity well into the 8th century. Many, if not most, of the extant floor mosaics were funded by donors. As was common practice in East and West, in Italy as well as in Asia Minor or North Africa, donors perpetuated their memory and the memory of their donation through mosaic inscriptions inserted in the floors themselves. As reward for their gift, they hoped for the help of Christ and the saints, both when it came to the Last Judgment, but sometimes already in this world. Detailed versions of these inscriptions contain formulas of prayer and submission. That's an example from Rehab, of prayer and submission to God, the name of the patron saint, the names of the bishop and of local church officials who oversaw the construction work, a term for the donation, prosphora or carpophoria, the names of the donor or donors, and the date. Occasionally, the mosaic as object of the donation itself and the mosaicists are mentioned. Most of this can be missing, but the name of the donor is almost indispensable. In a number of inscriptions, the donors remain anonymous, but even then, they make reference to their names in the formula. I give the translation, whose names God knows. Obviously, the name of the donor, whether in fact mentioned or not, seems to be of distinct importance. Within the geographic region in question, only a restricted number of donors chose the image beside the inscription. Even there, it was not a general practice. The church of St. Cosmas and Damian in Jerash, ancient Gerasa, was the northernmost of a complex of 3 churches built between the years 529 and 533 in the time of Bishop Paul of Gerasa. It's the church to the left. Nave, aisles, and the intercolumnar spaces are covered with mosaic, divided in bordered carpet-like fields. A simple pattern of rosebuds covers the aisles. A complex pattern of squares of different sizes and alignments in the nave. I want to have a close look at every possible evidence for donors in this church. We only have a historic photograph of the whole, so I have to present that. There are 2 inscriptions. The first, in the middle of the narrow space between the nave and the sanctuary, and another one inserted in the mosaic of the nave in its easternmost portion. The first inscription is flanked by 2 panels. Framed by these panels can be seen here, framed by 2 trees. To the right, a man dressed in long tunic and cloak holds a burning censer far away from his body. An inscription identifies him as Theodoros Paramonarios. That's a church office. To the left, a woman, also dressed in long tunic and cloak, raises her arms in a gesture of prayer. An inscription tells us that she is Georgia Theodorou Paramonariou, that is, Georgia, the one of the Paramonarios Theodore. Although she is usually identified as Theodore's wife, she could also be his daughter, as the structure of the inscription is the same for wives as well as for sons and daughters. Both figures are isolated and framed by a frame and by trees, and at least Theodore holds an attribute that seems to fit his profession. The two share the same frontal stand and straightforward gaze. They refer to the spectator. The inscriptions in the square in the nave names the patron saints Cosmas and Damian and is an explicit donor inscription of the tribune Dagisteos, who asks God to accept his gift. Dagisteos was a high-ranked military who later fought in the wars of Justinian I. Nonetheless, his image is not present. The inscription between Theodore and Georgia indicates the patron saints Cosmas and Damian, the date, which translates to 533 AD, the reigning Bishop Paul, and at the end, in form of a play on names, points to Theodore as one who obeys to the orders of his Bishop Paul. Although the inscriptions do not explicitly reveal it, Theodore and Georgia can be identified as donors. First, there are other churches in which a narrow strip between nave and sanctuary contains more or less isolated figures, in the majority of cases oriented frontally towards the spectator and with their names inscribed alongside the figures. This is the case in St. Stephen in Erassus, in the central nave as well as in the lateral northern nave, the aisle. At the east end of the northern aisle of St. Stephen, the names of the defaced figures Abosobeos and Rabos correspond to names in inscriptions immediately to the west. Here are the figures. The inscriptions are immediately to the west, which, according to their set phrase, are donor inscriptions. Second, the static and frontal, almost statue-like stand distinguishes Theodore and Georgia from the vivid, active genre figures in other mosaic floors. We will see more of them. This could in fact be a faint reflex of the ancient honorary statue, conceded by Roman municipalities as common practice to benefactors who had generously contributed to the adornment or well-being of their civic community. Still in the year 608, Anno Domini, after Phocas, the emperor, gave the Pantheon in Rome to Pope Boniface IV, the Byzantine emperor was rewarded with an honorary statue on the Roman Forum. The association of donor, upright pose, and statue can also be found in the description by Procopius of Gaza from the early 6th century of an early Byzantine series of paintings in Gaza in which he praises a donor depicted on a painting. How beautiful it is to see his standing still like a statue amidst of ships. The medium of the floor mosaic, could be seen as the lowest rank in the hierarchy of materials from bronze to marble to painting to floor. There remains the possibility that Theodore and Georgia were honored for other merits than a donation, as the inscription referring to Theodore does not necessarily suggest his function as donor. In the rectangular sanctuary of the Chapel of Elia, Mary, and Sorek at Jerash, the wine scrolls, which spring from a palm tree, include motifs of hunt, tame and wild animals, birds, a man carrying something heavy on his shoulder, another one in oriental costume cutting grapes. Among this vivid country life, 3 medallions, one here, one there, are filled with the figures of Mary, Sorek, and a lyre, their names inscribed besides the heads, each carrying an attribute. Of the 3, only 2 have survived. Again, they stand unmoved, looking at the spectator. Their place within the floor pattern and their static frontal pose speaks in favor of the interpretation as donors. However, it is also possible that the now lost inscription, which was located in this field, was not a donor inscription, but a commemorative one rather than a dedication. In fact, the representation of donors in the sanctuary of a church is rather uncommon and casts a light doubt on the common interpretation of the 3. Apart from the donor's statue-like pose, figures engaged in various activities have been identified as donors. They have to be seen within the general repertory of floor mosaics of the region. Apart from geometric patterns, the predominant motifs are acanthus scrolls, wine scrolls, interlaced bands or intersecting lines, populated with animals, people, and occasionally objects. The themes seem rather restricted. As one might expect, scenes from the Old Testament are rare, scenes from the New Testament absent. God should not be trampled underfoot. Instead, motifs from rural life and work, trade and transport, hunting, animals of every species, and plants predominate these mosaics. Occasionally, this range of subjects is complemented by calendrical motifs and personifications of seasons, months, and the earth. In the church of St. Lot and Procopius in Kirbat al-Mukayyad, the nave is covered by wine scrolls, enclosing images of a vintage cycle, for example, cutting the grapes, transport by man or animal, pressing, various hunting motifs, for example, archer against lion, dog chasing rabbit, man with lance against lion, animals, birds, and a bearded man in the posture of a reclining shepherd. I think it should be this one. The floor contains no images of donors, although donors are mentioned in several inscriptions of the church. The motifs seem to be distributed at random. The choice does not seem to follow an elaborate program. The nave of the church of the Diakon Thomas in the Ayun Musa Valley displays acanthus scrolls framed by a rich acanthus border. The motifs in the scrolls are those we have seen already: collecting of fruits, archer against bear, archer against lion, cutting of grapes, transport with donkey, the reclining shepherd, wild and tame animals, and again a man fighting a lion with a lance. However, this mosaic has a distinct feature, an inscription indicating his name as Stephanos. This has led to the widely accepted assumption that, in fact, the lion fighter Stephanos is another donor. Except for the name of the Diakon Thomas, underneath a heraldic eagle in the south aisle, no other mosaic inscription exists. The motive of the lion fight is not an individual invention for Stephanos.